Hello and welcome to Bookkeeping 201. The prerequisites for this session are Bookkeeping 101 Parts 1 and 2, without which you may be at a little bit of a loss as to what we're going to cover in this session, which is how to transfer data to your general ledger system using accounting batches. In order to fully understand the process, we're going to review a little bit about financial accounts, contributions versus price sets, and financial items. So let's get started with financial accounts. As you all know, under Administer, Civi Contribute, Financial Accounts, we'll see a list of all of the financial accounts that we have in our system. Now, it's the financial account information that's getting transferred to your general ledger system. So in order to be sure that everything gets transferred correctly, especially if you're transferring to QuickBooks, you'll need to review that your accounting codes match one for one with what you have in QuickBooks. If you don't use accounting codes, you can use the account name. However, there are some limitations, and it's a little more difficult to maintain than a 6-digit or 5-digit number system would be. The limitation here is that even though you're allowed to have financial types that are longer than 31 characters, and you're allowed to have financial accounts in QuickBooks that are longer than 31 characters, the IIF import format will truncate at 31 and will end up creating a new account for you. So you don't want that to happen. So you'll need to review all of your account names, make sure they match one for one and are less than 31 characters. So the requisite for either the financial account code or the financial account name to match one for one is really only critical when it comes to QuickBooks or if you are using the Account Edge file export format. You've heard me mention IIF. That is the only import format file that QuickBooks Desktop will allow for import. Okay? This will not work with QuickBooks Online. And your only other option, other than using IIF format for import, is to enter information manually into QuickBooks. For any other general ledger system, your only option is to enter summary data manually. So let's talk a little bit about contributions versus contributions that use price sets. It is the line items that you are going to be transferring to your general ledger software. The easiest way to explain this is for us to record two contributions, one that doesn't use a price set and another that does use a price set, and then look at the difference as to how they appear on the financial summary tab. So let's just record our first contribution without a price set. We'll just make it a generic donation and we'll leave it paid by check, and we'll click Save. Okay, so what we see as the financial type on the Contributions tab matches what we see as the description or the financial type that we see on the Financial Summary tab. Now, if we go back to the Contributions tab and record a contribution with a price set, I'm going to select the price set. I'm going to select my typical price set. I'm going to select family, and I'm going to select an annual building fund amount. There's room for an additional donation, but I don't want that. And I'll enter a check number, and I'll click Save. Now, you'll note that my contribution was saved with a financial type of split. You will see this often in QuickBooks when you have a deposit that is going to different income accounts or multiple income accounts. You'll see the same thing with a payment that is being attributed to multiple income accounts. You'll see a split on the top level, and this signifies that there is additional detail to be seen in that transaction. If we click on the down arrow, we'll see the different financial types listed for the contribution that we recorded. Now, this is key. This is the information actually that we want to transfer to our general ledger system. If we transfer a lump sum amount to an account called split, it'll mean absolutely nothing. What we really need to see is the detail. And this is what the line items do. They show you the detail. We can see this in a bit more clarity on the Financial Summary tab. So we have this single contribution amount for $13.60 under split, but on the Financial Summary tab, we're going to see it split out for $1,000 for the building fund and $360 for member dues. And that is the exact information that we need to transfer to our general ledger for the numbers to make sense. So let's talk a little bit about financial items. For every line item, a financial item is created. For every change made to a contribution, additional financial items are created by the system to function as an audit trail. The easiest way to see these financial items in action is to make a change to a contribution. Let's say that for this donation contribution, I made a mistake. It really should be $36 instead of $18. Before I make the change, however, I just want to point out there is the single line item or the single financial item that is currently listed. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to click to edit the contribution and change the contribution amount to $36. I also have to update the net amount at the bottom here in the additional details section. And I'm going to click Save. And now we see that the donation has been updated. We see a total of $36. If we click the down arrow, we have an additional financial item that was created to show that increase in amount. So an additional $18. So even though we've recorded 2 contributions, we're going to see more lines than that in the accounting batch area. And it's important that all of these items be included in your accounting batch. Otherwise, your file will be imbalanced, and especially where QuickBooks is concerned, it won't be happy and it won't want to import the file if that's the case. Another thing to note is that as of CiviCRM 4.7, changes are no longer allowed to the financial type of a contribution that uses price sets. This is to avoid complications with updates to the individual line items. So if a mistake is made on a contribution that uses price set, you should cancel it and record a new contribution with the correct information. So we've finally arrived at accounting batches. To check whether or not you have sufficient permissions for accounting batches, you would do that by going to the front end of your JManage website, click on People, Permissions, and Roles. Typically, it would only be the bookkeeper who would get permissions for accounting batches. So we would click on Edit Permissions for the bookkeeper role. And what I like to do is to use the Control key and the F key at the same time, and then start typing accounting batches, because that brings you to a whole slew of permissions that you will need to check, just like so. Okay, and unless you don't want somebody deleting the batches, you'd probably want to select all of these different permissions to assign in order to be able to view, export, and so forth. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. You got to click Save after you change permissions, way down at the bottom of the screen. And Save Permissions. Okay, so if we go back to the JManage back office, when we click on Finances, we should see this option in the menu, Accounting Batches. If you don't, you may not have remembered to save. So you'll go back and check off those permissions again, like we just did. But once you've got those permissions, you should have this accounting batch item listed in your Finances menu. So now that we've got the accounting batches permissions, we're going to create a new batch. Now, it's important to leave this 10-digit date format in the batch name. Whatever you call the batch before that 10-digit date is totally up to you. We're just going to call it our Bookkeeping 201 batch. These optional constraints have to do with the filters that we'll see in a minute, but you can narrow things down by selecting a payment method, and you can include some data integrity checks by entering the number of transactions that are going to be in this batch and the total amount if you know them ahead of time. Again, these are optionals. You don't have to enter anything here should you not wish to. And then we'll click Save. And then we're presented with a screen. Up here is the accounting batch. No transactions are currently in it. And then we have this search screen right here below. Okay, we can click to open this search screen, and it functions much like any other search screen in your JManage database. Okay, you can limit if you're looking only for cash and check contributions for this particular batch. You can just select those, and so forth. So I'm not going to limit the search criteria because we are in our database and it's not too difficult to isolate the transactions we want to batch. And I'm going to grab the transactions that we recorded during our session. So we see here one line for 1360 for the split contribution. Okay, and then we see two lines for the $18. The first one is the original contribution, and the second one is the edit that we made to add an additional $18. I'm going to select Assign to Batch and Go. And then we can either save this for later, say we want to add some more transactions. We can just navigate away. We can close the batch to later be reopened if we need to add a few more items, or we can close and export the batch. Note that if you close and export the batch, you will no longer be able to reopen it to make any changes. So you'll want to make sure that your batch is correct before you export it. So I'm just going to click Close and Export Batch. Here you'll find 5 different format options for export, and it really depends on what accounting package you have that will determine which export you use. If you use Account Edge, we do have a custom CSV file that's built to specification. You would use that export format and then follow Account Edge instructions to import that information into your Account Edge general ledger system. There is just a generic CSV file, which you would use for any other accounting package aside from QuickBooks or Account Edge. So let's take a look at what these different QuickBooks file formats look like. We'll start with the first one, QuickBooks Desktop Journal Entries. Again, these formats are solely for QuickBooks Desktop. They will not work with QuickBooks Online. Okay? So just select the first option. Our computers will prompt us where to save the file. So here we have the downloaded file. Now, if we want to check to see what it looks like before we import it into QuickBooks, we can do that by opening the file through Excel. So if we click to open and we navigate to where we just saved our file and we set the settings on files to all files, we'll see the IIF file that we just exported. We double click on it. Excel will take us through this wizard to separate the information into columns. We click Finish, and this is what our file will look like. Okay, as you can see, we have a set of transactions for the split contribution that's split up into member dues and building funds. And all of that amount is going directly into the deposit bank account. And then we have the original donation contribution for $18, and then the additional $18 amount that we added to the contribution. Okay, an important thing to note here is the transaction type is general journal. The date is the date of the contribution, and the account is according to account name as opposed to account number. Okay, so I'm just going to close out of this file. So after logging into QuickBooks, if this is the first time that you're importing an IIF file into QuickBooks, you'll definitely want to back up your production company file, and you may even want to create a copy and practice on the copy of your QuickBooks company file as opposed to your production company file. You could also, after creating a backup and importing the file, restore the backup if something goes wrong. You would do either of those according to instruction by clicking on the File menu and selecting either Backup Company or Create Copy. So you'll follow QuickBooks instructions on how to do those. Now, to import, we're still under the File menu. We select Utilities, Import IIF Files. Okay, we navigate to where we save the file. And as soon as we double click on the file, we'll get a message that QuickBooks has imported the information if everything went correctly. So since we used the journal entry format, we're going to go to Reports, Accountant and Taxes, and click on Journal to view what this looks like. And here we can see the 3 separate sets of transactions as they were imported. Okay, so let's go back. Let's take a look at just one other import file format. The one that's most popular is actually the QuickBooks Desktop Deposit that uses the account codes. So we would go through the same process of exporting the batch and then opening the file through Excel. And as you can see here, instead of having multiple sets of transactions like we did with the journal entries, we only have one set of transactions. Some important things to note: the type of transaction is deposit. The date is according to the 10-digit date that we had in our batch name, okay, as opposed to the contribution date. That can be helpful when you want to have the date in QuickBooks match exactly the physical date of deposit. So not necessarily the date that you recorded contribution, but the date that you actually physically deposited a bunch of checks into the bank. Okay, so that's the date, and this file goes according to account number. So let's take a look at what this will look like after we import it into QuickBooks. Okay, so just a reminder, this is what the transactions looked like after we imported the general journal format of the IIF file. And now I'm going to show you what it's going to look like after we import the deposit format. Using the deposit format, you see we have a single deposit that has multiple line items looking at the same journal report. And if we look under the chart of accounts and we go into the bank deposit and we take a look, you see here it's listed as split, and you've got in the memo the name of the accounting batch that it came from, and if we double click on it, we see the different splits in the account. So that brings us to the end of Bookkeeping 201, where we reviewed financial accounts, contributions versus price sets, financial items, and accounting batches. Thanks for watching.